What's up, folks? I'm Odd, by the way, and welcome back to a random color generator challenge. This was actually a suggestion from one of my subscribers, I believe both on here and on Tumblr, if you're the same person. Fernstar suggested that I do a random color palette challenge, making two characters with different palettes that were a couple, kind of lovers or something related to that. And I thought that sounded fun. I've done something ish similar in my mind, at least, because I'm basic. I made palette, I made rivals based off of the inverse of a color palette, and that turned out to variable results to me. So I'm curious to try and combine basically two characters' color palette motifs almost, and maybe I'll integrate parts of one into the other or something like that as well to kind of connect them a little bit more, kind of use both together almost. But to start out, of course, we have to start with the palette generator. We're on coolers again, and we're just gonna roll our first palette and see what we get. Obviously, also, it's Pride Month, so they're probably gonna be gay. When are they not? Anyway. A boop. A boop. Oh, that's... It's black and white. I think I kinda want to re-roll. That feels very... Yeah, I want something fun. That'll work. Ooh, this is very, like, teddy bear. Like, soft. Maybe coquette is the term. Very, very light and pastel with a little bit of brown thrown in there. Okay, very cute. So that's Cambridge blue, then we have coral pink, which actually looks like its description. The Cambridge blue, not so much. That kind of looks more teal to me. Pale dogwood, which I always thought was just kind of white, so maybe we're exaggerating a bit here too. Isabelline, which is almost white. Oh, I need to darken my canvas so I can see that better. It's not all F's like your standard white, so it is a not white, but it's definitely a shade of white. Okay. And a raw umber, which also looks like it fits its description pretty well. Alright, so that is our first palette, and let's see our second palette. Boop. 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 For my face bar. Here we go. Woo! Okay. We have we have one of the same colors in this one. We have that same pale dogwood. Interesting. But this is almost like a more saturated version of the original. I kind of want to re-roll because it feels too close. Hold on. I might regret that, but that's okay. Okay. All right. So we have a cerulean that seems far more true to its name again, to me. Maybe a little dark. A dark slate gray. That is a green, sir. I'm getting very fast at typing in these hex codes. An eggshell, which is another kind of white. Much more white, actually. It's EEE. BD3. Ebdith. And then we got a dark goldenrod. We have a saffron. Do you mind? One of the cats is in here. She's playing with something. What do you have? Oh, do you have my toilet paper roll? You have my toilet paper roll that I've been using to wind yarn. Ah, beautiful home. Home studio here, where the cats also live. But okay, so since we have that, let me pop you guys down over to clipped so you can see what we're working with here side by side. They look interesting. They're not very contrasty. They're not very contrasting, but I could see where they could be, right? So instead of more reds, we have more blues. This one is very kind of seaside to me. They both kind of work in that way that they're muted. They're very pastel. Alright, this one's like pastel watermelon, and then this one, I don't know. I don't know how to quite describe the... I'm not a person who names color palettes, so... Alright, well, we have our 2 color palettes for us today, so I will, I think, try to get started on these and shape out some characters based off of it and connect them via story somehow. So, I'll see you there once I figured that out, and pop this over to speed paint voiceover for you. So I started my process with a kind of different method to my color thumbnails. Instead of going right for the design, I did some like free association with the colors, almost to get an idea of what I wanted the characters' color distributions to be, and the overall vibe that I felt like they had. I wound up having a lot more ideas for the first palette as opposed to the second. The first was very watermelon and strawberry to me, and the brown was very much like a teddy bear. I wound up going for a very sort of cottagey, coquette sort of look for the character, making that brown hair the hair color and the light pink the skin color. The second palette only really gave me ocean vibes, specifically, genuinely, just an ocean scene at like sunset. I went for a sort of surfer vibe for this character's outfit because of that, with a blue mohawk and kind of a dark blue fade. I also gave them each some little accents of the other's colors to tie them together just that little bit more. I actually got a bit of inspiration after I wound up doing the thumbnails that only came to light in the sketch because especially the second design gave me the idea to take this pair into the supernatural. I thought to make that like a potential AU for these two, but honestly I like the idea of the fun one being their main existence, so I changed our surfer girl into a shark girl mermaid of sorts and the more cottagey girl into a fairy because that also fit her aesthetic very well. I also feel like it makes their connection as love interests that much easier because they can both be sort of disguised in a human world where they accidentally found each other anyway. I thought initially this would go up by June, but it seems like Speed Paint Saturday is still technically May this week, so I also get to squeeze in one more semi-mermaid before mermaid. I did 2 mermaids this month. Woo! I think I want to call these two Morgan and Briar. Morgan for the shark and Briar for the fairy. They're both kind of obvious names for their likely respective homes because Morgan is actually associated with the sea. Since I'd already designed these two together, I just decided to draw them interacting right away in a way you would see most of their designs, so I made this little scene with Briar sort of strolling up to Morgan, who was relaxing at the seaside. As I tend to do with these, I experimented a bit and even played around with tiling for Briar's dress. That process took a few tries, but I think that it turned out pretty nicely. She has this sort of simple strawberry pattern on the white of her dress to better bring in all of the red and green from the rest of her design. I decided to allow myself layer modes to shade for this one, but I did actually wind up going back and making a non-shaded variant of this because I really like the flats with the background I wound up making and the way that I did the lines later. So there is at least one version that's a bit more technically true to form, but it's my imaginary rule set anyway, I get to do what I want. Let's move on to some lore. Briar spent a lot of time hidden in plain sight. Exploring the human world wasn't expressly forbidden, especially for a young fairy, but she was cautioned to keep to herself to avoid any scrutiny, and avoid attention not from humans, but other magic creatures who roam their world as well, because they could prove to be especially dangerous. One place she was especially curious about, though, was the sea. Woodland fairies lived inland more often than not. Perhaps lake and swamp nymphs lived nearby, but nothing quite as massive and encompassing as the ocean. The magic there was more abundant than any ancient grove and far older, almost scary, and she knew the inhabitants would match, so she kept her distance. A lot of her visits were also highlighted by a certain surfer she would catch on the beach, tanned with blue hair and a certain kind of pull to her golden eyes. The two would share a few quick words occasionally, but the other girl was often out on the water by the time Briar got there, even in the early morning when no one else was around. She barely knew her name from the few conversations that they had. It was Morgan. But Briar was a little smitten all the same, a cute, athletic human so confident in the sea, much unlike herself. One morning, as she watched Morgan out on the waves, a massive tide came in, and Morgan excitedly went to meet it. Briar was amazed by her ability to skate along the cresting wave, but suddenly Morgan lost balance and fell in. Briar wasn't initially concerned. She'd learned this was something the surfers would deal with regularly, and that humans were in fact decent swimmers, but then Morgan was taking too much time to resurface. Briar couldn't see her anywhere in the water. Making sure there were no other humans around, she panicked and set to fly over. If Morgan had been disoriented, or worse, drowned, Briar could simply say that she swam out to her rescue later. As she scanned the water, she thought she could see movement below for just a moment, until another tidal wave hit her by surprise, pulling her under and out to the sea. Her wings were useless in the water, and her clothes weighed her down. Worse yet, she wasn't a very strong swimmer. Why would she need to be? She thought for certain that she would be claimed by the waves, and worse yet, possibly alongside the very person she came out to save, as she tried and failed to figure out which way was up after the waves had tossed her. Then she felt deft hands grab her waist. Briar emerged from the water beside Morgan, who seemed to have swam out to her instead, but from where? Then, as the two washed ashore, she realized Morgan looked different, far less human than she initially had. Sharp teeth poked out from her mouth as she spoke softly to the dazed fairy, and she realized a golden blue tail slapped on the sand nervously beside her. A mermaid! Briar realized that her fey features were still quite visible too, though less notable, but Morgan was still quick to catch on. The two became far closer from that day on, each curious about the other's worlds, but also their experiences in the human realm, the sort of in-between that allowed their two worlds to meet. They could be themselves with each other, which felt so rare for a fairy far from home and a shark mermaid whose people dispersed widely, unlike the more social mammalian mermaids. According to Morgan, they were the far more scary of the two. Have you seen orcas? Their relationship is still tentative and kind of falling into that bit more than friendship, but there is still that worry about their respective peoples. Morgan is more easygoing about it, given sharks and their way of thinking, but fairies are exclusively social. Each day spent together definitely changes each other's way of thinking bit by bit, though, and they seem to be making something all their own. But those are my designs for this week. I hope that you like them. I'm always down to create more characters and stories, even little one-offs like this. Maybe these two will still return at some point. No promises, but I think that they're super cute. I think Morgan would have an even more sharky form, and of course the two of them have their more human forms, but I wanted to showcase that bit of hint of fantasy for the two of them, just for fun anyway. Let me know what you think and any other art challenges you'd like to see me do in the future. These two came from a request after all. At that though, I'll leave this here, and I'll see y'all next time.